Hey, quick little video this week. I'm under the weather. I'm behind schedule. It happens. Last week I said I wanted to cover the rules of acquisition. That probably deserves a little more explanation because why would anyone want to cover that? Well, I was at work, I think 2 years ago or so, and I had a customer come in, and my coworker solved their problem. And for whatever reason, the first thought I had was, rule of acquisition number one. And I admit that was weird, but it made sense. I'll get more into that when I cover rule of acquisition number one. And it led me to get my own copy of the rules of acquisition. And I went through it and I found many of the rules, of course, self serving. A lot of people say, yeah, it's rules in a business context. Well, that doesn't mean that it can't be ethical. I do not believe that business and ethics are mutually exclusive. But once I got through the rules, I realized that many of these rules did not conform to canon. For example, most dedicated Star Trek fans will recognize that the 10th rule of acquisition is greed is eternal. They specifically state that. In this book, it says that the 10th rule of acquisition is a dead customer can't buy as much as a live one. Now, that also makes sense, but anyone who cleaves to canon would say, nope, the real 10th rule of acquisition is greed is eternal. And I don't think that's right. I don't think that's wrong. I believe that any text is subject to interpretation, whether it's a religious text, a secular text, a fantasy text, or a business text. I think that everything is determined by the situation that you're in, your context, and your beliefs. I think that you are always a factor in whatever situation you're in, how you react to things, what you believe, etc. And I think that if the 10th rule of acquisition makes more sense as a dead customer can't buy as much as a live one, if that has more precedence in your life than the idea that greed is eternal, I think that that is valid. I think if that is your truth, that is just as valid as the canon truth. There's nowhere in this book or in any book that says that it can't be rewritten. And I think a lot of people forget that. I feel like most people say, oh no, this is the way the book is. That is the only way that it is. And I think that that forgets that books are still physical things. You can misprint things. It might mean that that other version has less value in your eyes, but that doesn't mean that it has less value in someone else's eyes. I think that's an important thing that many people forget. And sure, I cleave to canon. In my mind, the 10th rule of acquisition is greed is eternal. But that's me. And that is specific to me. And I think that's one of the things that, because there isn't one person who wrote this book in in its entirety. This is an example of it because this is the book in its entirety and it does not conform to what is established. That is a factor that, because one person wrote it differently, does that make this the real version? Because this is all 285 rules. That doesn't mean that this is the end all be all, because this is all of them, when what is established in canon is different. That might mean that these are the Ferengi rules of acquisition of this universe, whereas the other that we know in the Star Trek universe is that version. I think that's a matter of interpretation. And again, someone might say, well, what does it matter? Star Trek is just a TV show. Star Wars is just a movie series. And I think that is a factor, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't have value. I'm a big believer in, as Jeffrey Sinclair said, we find meaning where we can. People will find meaning in what resonates with them. People will find meaning in the Code of the Jedi or the rules of acquisition. It just means that that is what resonates with them. And I think as long as it's ethical, as long as it's altruistic, that's fine. I think that any system that isn't altruistic has some issues. It's not sustainable. I think that any martial art that doesn't keep you alive doesn't do a good job of being a martial art. Any belief system that doesn't lead to altruism isn't necessarily a good system. And that's my opinion. And I could be wrong. But I think that, again, you're not going to find a system that promotes being a jerk to really get you very far in the long run. So that's how I look at it, and I'm going to be covering these because I think that there are multiple interpretations of each rule, and I want to see about laying down some, a mid ground. What of these rules in here are practical versus what we see in canon. And I think that at the very least, that'll have value to someone. So, we'll see you next week. Kanbei.